On 7 p.m. February 28, 2022, 4 dead, decomposing and somewhat dismembered bodies were recovered from an oil pipeline which connected two offshore oil facilities. The autopsy showed they suffered very painful and soul-disturbing deaths. The event upon which this outcome came to be would go on to become one of the most spine-tingling and timber-shivering fatal workplace incidents of the decade. This is the story of the Paria diving incident. On February 25th, a team of 5 divers, namely Christopher Boudrum, Faisal Kurban, Kazim Ali Jr., Rishi Nagasar, and Yusuf Henry, were sent down into the ocean to perform some maintenance work on a temporarily unused underwater oil pipe, approximately 30 inches in diameter. They would have to scuba dive their way down there to access the repair-needing area. Fortunately, these guys were quite experienced in the art of underwater oil pipe maintenance, as this was literally their job, which made this job pretty much a routine. Once the divers were under the water, they had to swim into what's called a diving bell, which is basically a giant half-closed enclosure which contains a giant artificially induced air bubble, which is created when the pressure within the bell is kept at a higher psi than that of which the ocean imposes. This chamber enabled the divers to work undisturbed by the ocean water and perform their task for long hours without needing oxygen refuels or any special underwater equipment. All was going pretty smooth at first, just like the hundreds of previous jobs identical to this. It went wrong when they started to actually open the pipe to do the maintenance. You see, unused oil pipes like this are kept plugged with a giant super heavy duty rubber balloon, which keeps the oil from escaping out into the ocean. This plug would have to be removed in order for any maintenance to commence. Kazim Ali Jr., who happened to have a GoPro mounted on him, which actually managed to record everything, was tasked with fetching a wrench from the surface. As Kazim re-entered the chamber after handing the wrench to one of his guys, in a literal split second, everything goes black. Moments later, the entire group find themselves within the pipe they should have been working on. All of them are agitated, shocked, and stuck in absolute darkness. One man, Christopher Boudrum, does the respectable task of calling out to each of the members of the group to confirm their presence and health status.
I'm trying to come up.
But wait, let us first rewind and answer the question of what the F happened. You see, as the plug was being loosened and released, the giant artificial air bubble, which kept the divers dry and safe, popped. The pipe which had suddenly opened was an area of low pressure, which the hyperbaric chamber would need to immediately pressurize, lest the immense pressure which coming from the big blue sea impose itself upon the lesser pressurized area, crushing everything within it. Basically, the little air bubble that they created got popped by a suddenly appearing straw. This phenomenon is what's called delta P, or delta pressure. Once the plug of the pipe had been released, the air pressure within the chamber became too small to hold back the wrath of the ocean, as the pipe happened to be absolutely unpressurized. This resulted in a very, very fast influx of ocean water directed into the pipe. The force was so strong it literally teleported the 5 men into the oily insides of the pipe, along with all their gear and equipment. Resuming the story, it turns out they reached an air pocket, which enabled them to breathe. Christopher Boudrum, the main man, is calling all his mates to check if they're alive or not.
You want? You and 5 wants to get all the time? Right now. Who else with you? We have 5 there alone. Can't for you? Right there. Right there where? Can't everything alright with you? No. Any limbs break? All legs break. Your leg, alright. 5. Anything happen to you? Yeah. A 5? No way. Yusuf, anything happen to you? Yeah, boy. What happened? Alright.
Kazim and Yusuf have broken limbs. Christopher, being the most able, takes on the role of leader and uplifts the spirits of those trapped with him, and immediately begins formulating plans of escape. Okay, anybody know what direction we came in? Says Chris. 2 of the divers claim they got in foot first, which means they had to push their way back head first, which is what they did. The men struggled and crawled along in absolute agony. Eventually, they came across a couple of scuba diving oxygen tanks, which still had oxygen. Unfortunately, the sections of pipe ahead were absolutely filled with water, and sharing 2 oxygen tanks among 5 people who were suffering grave injuries and had difficulty breathing from the life-draining, oil-enriched air was just impossible. This meant Christopher had to go alone. In the dark, unsure if the place he was heading to was a place called Berth 6, the offshore oil port where they first came in. The chances were 50-50. Reach Berth 6 and possibly survive, or end up in Berth 5, another station which was connected to Berth 6 by the pipe, which unlike Berth 6 was completely sealed. Christopher trudged along, pain increasing, eyes burning, energy depleting, until Yes, the sun! Christopher had reached the outside world. After 175 feet and many hours of pain and suffering, this would finally be it. He just had to send a rescue team down there to go get his buddies, and everything would be okay. Unfortunately, it was not. But before we proceed, a word from our sponsor. Just kidding. Let me give you a little background on who exactly they were working with. So these divers are employees of a company called LMCS, which is owned by Kazim Ali's parents. The company specializes in underwater equipment maintenance, just like this. They were commissioned by Paria Fuel Trading Co., a state-owned oil corporation based in Trinidad and Tobago, a country in the Caribbean. Now, it turns out an operation like this requires a lot of time, money, and effort for it to be safe, something which the company apparently didn't have. But basically, the divers were working on an active nuclear bomb, so to speak. Back on the surface, Christopher alerts other LMCS employees of the catastrophe which has just ensued. Unbelieving at first, they press Chris for more details, and once they've been convinced, they immediately send other divers to go down and check. Once the divers heard the sound of someone knocking from within the pipe, it was confirmed. There were people within. Unfortunately, there was no way to get them out. Literal hours later, not a single rescueman had been sent down to save the divers. Due to complications with Paria, the company who owned the facility, and lack of sufficient equipment, they couldn't find a way to get them out of there. Many hours later, the news arrived that Paria ordering the special equipment needed to save them. All they needed to do now was get it in and get them. Something which would never happen, as Paria had apparently been plotting a dirty excuse to just leave them in there. In a leaked WhatsApp message, it showed that the company Paria had been planning on just telling the news and the anxious family members who were waiting outside their facility, by the way, that they had already died and that they would send their condolences to them. They also planned on telling them that a mission to recover their bodies was underway. Both of these things were absolutely untrue. It had been almost a day now, and the few divers sent down to check on the status from time to time reported that they could still hear knocking from within the pipe. It's just that Paria wouldn't allow them to commence an operation. They probably didn't want the people to know of what a bad and stupid accident happened at their facilities. LIMC, the company owned by Kazim's parents, would constantly urge Paria to do something, or at least let them do something. Paria, being the blatantly stubborn company that it is, would constantly refuse, claiming that they would have the Coast Guard come and do the rescue. As for the Coast Guard, they apparently also didn't have the equipment, which became another obstacle of the rescue of the 4 remaining divers. This conundrum of events would continue on for a good few days, leaving the trapped divers suffering, dying, and rotting under the sea. It would only be 3 days later that the divers would actually be recovered. I say recovered because in those crucial days, when people on the surface were still arguing about the logistics of the rescue, the divers died, presumably of suffocation, as they were trapped in an air bubble, which only had so much oxygen as to only support them for just 2 days. Because of how long they'd been in the pipe, the two companies, LIMC and Paria, knew that they were already dead. They didn't even need to check. They would now shift their efforts to the recovery of the bodies. Leaked images of the dead divers show their whole bodies black with oil and decomposition. After an autopsy, it was revealed that the divers didn't just pass away altogether, but instead, they died one by one. The last living diver must have been absolutely traumatized upon his last companion's death. The aftermath of the situation left many in shock, grief, and PTSD. Like the only survivor, Christopher, who in a recent interview claimed that he was taken to a hospital for supposed decompression sickness, which he actually didn't have. While away, he absolutely thought they were sending a rescue team to go get his friends, which they didn't, and he was also so hell-bent on saving his friends that he claimed he would absolutely volunteer to do it for them, as unlike the rescuers, he knew what it was like down there, firsthand. To this day, Christopher claims the ordeal still haunts his dreams, as when it was agreed down on the pipe that it would be him who would be the one to rescue his friends, he promised his friends that they would absolutely be saved. He basically broke his promise. It was not only Christopher who suffered from the event, many more friends and family shared his trauma and grief. As for Paria, a bad image was permanently painted on their face and company profile. There are still many more its and bits to this tale, bits which, if were covered here, would turn this into a documentary. I'll leave you guys with a single word which will hopefully enlighten you and wisely influence your future actions. That word is subscribe.